Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my podcast, Anxietea, a mental health podcast, where I give you mental health stories, self-care tips and techniques, and whatever you all want me to discuss. As a reminder and a disclaimer that I am not a mental health professional, just a mental health advocate getting through life one day at a time, here is also the warning that there may be sensitive topics discussed within this podcast, so please feel free to leave if this does not sound like the podcast for you. So, without further ado, welcome to episode 15. Let's grab our tea, take a sip in of some self-love, and exhale the stresses of life. Today, instead of tea, I am drinking water as I'm feeling dehydrated. So, for today's podcast, we are going to discuss addiction awareness, more discussion on that topic, and we are going to do an interview on a loved one who has another loved one struggling with addiction. So, to start, if you wouldn't mind, please tell me your story regarding interacting with or dealing with a loved one with addiction.
Wow, it is a long and tragic story that it's been 10 years now that two of my children have been involved with opioid addiction, and we have lost so many of their close friends to the same disease. It's very sad. And the social stigma still seems to be there, even though there's a lot more awareness about it. But still, I feel as though people still judge when this is something that is not easily able to be escaped. And once you're in it, it's very difficult to get away from it. So I have two children with the opioid addiction, and I have a husband who struggled with alcohol and drug addiction as well. And I've been married 37 years now, and it's been a long haul.
So, second question, how did you know that they had an addiction?
Well, with my husband, I knew right away, but I wasn't aware of how deep addiction ran. And I grew up in a family that had no addictions, so there was no schooling about it. No one really talked about it. So in my mind, I felt like, well, all he needed was to see a good example, and then he would walk away from his addiction, and he just wouldn't do it anymore. But that's not the way it works. It has nothing to do with seeing a good example or even encouraging them to have a good example. It's just they're locked in, and it's a long, hard lifetime struggle.
Had they shown any sign or behaviors of addiction disorder before the addiction began?
Well, my husband, the entire time I knew him, he'd always had the addiction. But he was still able to function as normally as I thought possible. Now, with my two kids, they had a lot of anxiety and depression, and I did seek professional help for the both of them, and they both ended up needing medication. But at the time, the addictive medications were being dispensed, so both of them fell into the trap by they had mental issues that led to the addiction.
Yeah, and these medications were benzodiazepines, which are medications that doctors are more hesitant to give to patients now. But a while ago, it was more common for patients struggling with depression and anxiety as um, as common as it might have been back then, they were given benzos, which were very addictive. So, what information did you know regarding addiction before it ever impacted you?
I didn't know anything about it at all. When I was growing up, nobody ever talked about it. It was all hush hush, and there was no realization that the two were connected, that if someone had some anxiety or depression, that it could possibly blossom into addiction. And it wasn't even about, well, the kids fell into a wrong group of friends. They had a nice group of friends, and they had done good in school. The one was number one in web design competitions. He was salutatorian. He graduated college. I mean, there was no inkling on my part that he couldn't pursue a normal happy life. And for the other one, he was straight A's all the way through school, and he was very dedicated to physical education and eating healthy and working out. So really, it just it had nothing to do with what society says. Oh, they ran around with the wrong crowd. No, that's not how it came about to be. They were hard workers and they studied hard, and it just was a sad series of events.
How have you been supporting your loved ones with an addiction?
Well, for the most part, being there through thick and thin, loving them, and not yelling at them. I mean, they already know they're struggling. Yelling at them is not going to make a bit of difference. And I hear so many people have kicked their kids out of the house because that's the norm. When you go to these NA meetings, they're telling you you have to look out for yourself, get rid of them, get them out of your life. And you know what? These people are getting picked up by somebody. Why can't it be their own parents? I mean, it might come to that someday where I just can't deal with it anymore. But as long as I'm capable, well, I'm going to be the one there for them. Why should it be a stranger on the street?
So, the next question is, how has your support benefited your loved one?
Well, they have survived 10 years plus, and a lot of their friends have unfortunately passed away. And a lot of those parents that had kicked their kids out say to me, I wish I just had them on the couch one more time. I wouldn't care if they were working or not working. I would just be happy just to see them. So, based on what they're saying, that they would have done things differently, I'm making my choices. And a lot of people that don't really understand this, because a lot of the groups still feel that I'm doing the wrong thing, and they'll say, well, the reason they're still doing drugs is because you never did the tough love thing and kicked them out and told them you were done with them. And I say, maybe the reason they're still alive is because I didn't do the tough love thing, and I'm there for them. And prayer is a big part of it. Prayer can change a lot of things, so never underestimate the power of prayer.
What do you know triggers them, and how do you try to decrease those triggers within the house or being around them?
Uh, Triggers? Oh, there are a million triggers. Having money, for one, so it's a vicious cycle with you want them to be productive and go to work, but then the more money they have, the more money they're spending on drugs. However, if they don't have the money for the drugs, then they're stealing to get what they need, because it seems like the judicial system just is a carousel. They get into the system and they just can't get back out, and there's really no end to it. It's just round and round. They owe more money because they have court things, but they don't have a license to get to the court things. So it's the whole system just needs reassessed.
What ways do you notice your loved ones supporting themselves?
I feel like they are still hard workers and they want to do good. It's just they have good times and bad, and when there's a tragedy or a severe bump in the road, they can set them off course, and they're at it full strength again.
How do you know when your loved one is staying on the right track?
When they're able to save money.
For the next question, what can people do to decrease the stigma against addiction?
Well, for one thing, people need to be more understanding. It is a disease just like heart disease. How would they feel if their loved one had a heart problem and they were eating greasy food and it was against the law because you had to go to the hospital for your heart disease, and every time they had a french fry they would get arrested? It's ridiculous. I think locking people up for having a drug problem is just ridiculous. I think that if they made it more of a medical issue and less of a criminal issue, it would make far more sense.
And recently, what I have researched is that not only is addiction defined as a disease as of recent, it has also been defined as a mental disorder and a mental illness. My last question is, what advice do you have for both people with addiction and those trying to help their loved ones with addiction?
The people with addiction, I personally don't have an addiction, so I really can't give advice on something that I'm not in the middle of as far as having it. But for someone who loves someone with an addiction, my thing is just pray, 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 and be as supportive as you can without yelling and screaming and causing more chaos, because the disease itself is just chaos. And these kids are sick. When you see them when they're really bad, their skin is gray, their minds are not thinking the way they normally would be. It's like an alien stepped into their body and just took over. But their skin becomes so gray, they actually look as if they're like the Walking Dead, because it's just the disease has just eaten them up. So for a loved one, I would say the biggest thing is to be supportive, pray, and make sure you lock up all your valuables at all times, because it's not that they're thieves by nature. It's just that's the nature of the beast of this disease.
So, as we complete our journey, I want to thank you for participating in this interview. And I want to wish everyone luck on their own individualized journeys and hope that they can find comfort in these videos and knowing that they are not alone. Please share these videos to spread awareness and end the mental health and addiction stigma. For those of you that do watch and support my videos, thank you. It means a lot to know that someone cares about these messages, especially now in a time where we need more love and less hate towards one another. Now that we have completed our 15th journey together, let's take a sip in of some self-love and exhale the stresses of life. Thank you for listening.